Hey, welcome. This is the first of the series, Inside the Line with Rob. Uh, Thank you for everyone's support in getting me to this point with, especially Joel and Ileana asking me to do this and providing all the support and training. And this is going to be the first one, and I've thought about it a long time. And in doing it, I've talked about the pirate show. The pirate case before. That was about an hour and 15 minutes, and it was a great case. But the biggest part about that was the crime scene. And I always thought, as my first guest, I wanted to have Kate Kelley, who was the evidence response team leader at the New York office who prosecuted that crime scene. And she agreed to come on as my first guest. And I'm going to bring her in right now. And there is Kate. How you doing, Kate?
Hey, Rob, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing good. And she said earlier we were talking, and it was about probably about 10 years since we've seen each other. A little bit more gray in both of us.
Yeah.
But just reminiscing, and then she's kind of asking how long this was going to be, and then I'm like, well, we have to stop at an hour and a half because Joel comes on. She's like, hour and a half? Like, I thought this was gonna be a half hour. I'm like, trust me, like you'll start talking on this, and before you know it, an hour will be going by. But Kate, why don't you give again the audience, mostly like I think a lot of coming over from Surviving the Survivor. Joel, former Fox News broadcaster, got into podcasting and does a lot of true crime. And I got on there for a case that Karen Reed, and we talked about that. Yeah, because Kelly's up in Boston. And we started talking about that and did a bunch of others. And then over the holidays, he asked me to do kind of like the biggest case. And I've done a number, but this one was by far the biggest one as far as around the world and what happened to it. But Kate, why don't you give an intro what you did in the Bureau so people kind of understand your background?
Yep. Well, like I said, Rob, I'm happy to be here. We have quite a history together of ending up in foreign countries working crime scenes where Americans have been killed or kidnapped. So it's important work. I retired from the FBI after about 22 years of service. Big part of my career was working crime scene. I was a member of the evidence response team, which is the FBI's version of a crime scene unit. And two of the offices I served in, I started in Roanoke, Virginia, and then I got transferred to New York City, which at first as a Boston girl, I was not happy, but I would tell you, I wouldn't change a minute in New York. The people, the experiences, the things I got to do on behalf of the American people, on behalf of the FBI, I wouldn't have done if I was in another field office. So while in New York, I worked organized crime on an organized crime squad, public corruption squad. And then I became all while I was doing ERT, which is evidence response team. But the thing about being on the New York field office, just so everybody understands, people say, well, why were you overseas working these cases? So the FBI has 4 field offices that allow that have jurisdiction overseas when the American interests are involved, whether it's our embassy or our citizens. New York, Washington, LA, and Miami. New York field office covers all of Africa and parts of the Middle East. So if an American citizen is kidnapped, maimed, obviously murdered in those parts of the world, the New York field office works with, the host country to get justice for our people, which is why I worked with Rob so much, because, a lot of, we worked in Africa together, and then parts of the Middle East. So that is why I deployed to Africa on several occasions for kidnapped or murdered Americans. This was obviously, to Rob's point, this was definitely one of the biggest cases, horrific cases. We lost 4 American innocent citizens, and then just the way it all worked with all the different entities was phenomenal. Teamwork at its best.
Yeah, so you go into how New York covers that area, and the big thing, New York's the biggest field office. I think there's like 1,200 agents in there. Sometimes New York thinks they're their own FBI. That's a joke outside of New York, but they really do have the great cases. And Kate was a case agent person. In the Bureau, you have people that do certain things. I was on the hostage rescue team, so I spent about 4 years in a field office. I wasn't like one of these guys that's called a case agent type thing. But I know the people that do them, and the people like Kate, I know to listen to. when they're giving me advice on stuff. But so we'll go into the sailboat. There's a link in the first comment on this is a link to the podcast I did with Joel that goes into the whole thing. It was a crazy 8 weeks, but basically a sailboat with 4 Americans gets 19 pirates on board, and I flew out there with the SEALs. They jumped into the ocean. I flew into a couple countries, got out to the aircraft carrier, and we were trying to negotiate with them. And because of certain reasons, they ended up shooting at the Navy ship I was on, looking over the edge, watching this go down. And at that same time, they end up shooting and killing the 4 Americans on board. The SEALs did an emergency execution trying to save them. They didn't. They got him alive. They got him back over to the hospital ship on the Enterprise, the aircraft carrier. They all died in surgery. There was 4 pirates that were killed, 2 by their own folks. They ended up when they shot the hostages, they just shot the pirates that were sitting next to them too. The SEALs came on board, killed 2 more, and then the SEALs got off after they extracted the wounded. They got off. I put Brian and Rob were 2 FBI agents that were with me. Rob was from the fly team. Brian was from the hostage rescue team. He was stationed in Nairobi as Rob was. And I told him, said, hey, look, this is a crime scene. Unless something's about to fall off the ship, take picture of it, move it back so it doesn't fall off. But otherwise, just secure the crime scene. So they sat on this sailboat for 8 hours in the baking sun. And we'll talk about how horrific that was. And then we got permission to remove the dead pirates, which was a chore in itself. And then we tied the sailboat up to the Navy ship to tow it back. And of course, the guy told me it's going to break within, a few hours. And sure enough, it did. So Brian got back on the sailboat with 3 sailors. The sailors somehow rigged it up that it actually drove under its own power for 4 days back to, we brought it back to the port in Djibouti, and it sat next to the Sterret, which was the Navy ship that we were on. And that's where Kate and some other folks met us. And again, that sailboat, 5 days in the baking sun, the 3 sailors and Brian slept on the top, so they weren't again infecting the crime scene. And then Kate shows up. I think you said you thought it was going to be like a small little sailboat.
Yeah.
It's 51, I think it's 51 feet.
Yeah, it was a 54-foot sailing vessel called the Quest, which was the name of the boat that the owner gave it, which obviously he's now deceased. And I'm not I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm a boater, but my boat is a little whaler. So a 54-foot crime scene you think is big, but when you're talking about 6 dead bodies, and I think Rob's going to show some pictures here shortly, in a very, very confined space. It's nothing I've ever experienced trying to process a crime scene while a boat's on water. It was, obviously we'll get into some details, but you couldn't make it up if we tried. And we were under time constraints and security constraints. And Rob, you've already alluded to, the temperatures were ridiculous trying to deal with. And, again, this was a crime scene where we had blood and brain matter baking in the sun. Like, if you name it, we had it. But it was quite something.
Yeah. So we get there, and I had been kind of running things from the ship, and I knew an ERT team was coming in from New York. Brian was there. Rob ended up having to be flown back to Africa to Nairobi to take on his normal responsibilities. And so Brian was there, and Kate shows up. I think you had 2 people with you, correct?
Yeah. So that's the funny thing. I mean, just, obviously ERT, we have rules. Usually when you process a crime scene, you usually do 8 to 10 people, sometimes as many as 16, depending on the scene. When you do major body digs or whatnot, or doing a house or even a car, literally 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 people. So we flew over with 3, myself and 2 others, and we lost one right out of the gate because he got deployed to another location off the coast.
We put him on a ship somewhere.
Yeah.
Like he was,
Yeah.
he was out looking for some other ship, and
yeah, exactly.
And I think he was on foreign ships. We never saw him again. We don't know what happened to
and he got pulled day one. So it was myself and one other person. Like I said, that's just not, it's not an ideal way to do a crime scene. And, say what you want, but the one thing I'll say about the ER, there's a joke in the FBI that you do it the ERT way, which means it is a slow and methodical process. With 8 to 10 people, it takes forever. You can imagine a boat sitting on the water that's moving, and there was 2 of us. So, it was everything that we thought could have gone wrong went wrong. But like I said in the beginning, and we'll get more into it, is teamwork. I mean, I was pulling people I didn't know. Hey, come here, put some tie back on. I need you to help me pull these bullets. And
well, that was even worse. So when I get there, and again, this is a sailboat. I'm going to pull up the picture of it next to this ship.
Yeah,
so that's the Quest, and that's the Navy ship. And so there's no ladder down, like there's no easy way down. And all of a sudden I see Kate and the other girl getting in Tyvek. So it's not just hot. You got to put Tyveks on to do the crime scene. And I'm like, I didn't even think of that, to me, it was like, okay, they'll handle it. I got other stuff to do. And I was dealing with the military folks and some other things, but just getting them down to that sailboat, we had to lower them down. And the one thing is that, as Kate said, this was absolutely a team thing. And I did the show FBI True on this, and Ann, who's the producer on that, former agent, talked me into it again, because said, hey, people need to understand what people in the FBI and the government do, for the American people. And I thought about it, and I said, this isn't about me. I just happen to be the eyes that I can tell most of the story, but it was an unbelievable team. And again, if you watch that other video, how we tracked the one pirate across Africa. But when I turned this over, the ship over to Kate and said, hey, I got to go do stuff. The ship's been great, doing anything that we wanted or needed. And I think they helped the same way. They went out of their way. Anything we needed to do what we were doing, they gave you.
Yeah. And, the thing about it is, like, again, not to be the crime scene geek that I am, but, there's certain rules, right? You only get one chance to work a crime scene because contamination is real. And, and you're all looking at the boat right now. Every inch of that ship and everything on it, as you're looking at right now, from where I stood, was a potential piece of evidence, right? From blood spatter evidence to ballistic evidence. There was, in essence, an excess of, 18, 16 AK-47s, which I think you'll probably see pictures of in a minute. But it just, every single inch. So the problem we had was, where do you put your supplies? Where do you put your photography equipment so you can take crime scene photos, and then obviously all of your bags and whatnot. So we literally left it on the top of the stair, which you see there, and then you see the orange ladder. Well, that's a suspension ladder. So that wasn't attached to the side of the ship. As soon as you stepped on that, it swayed. We had about a 2.5, 3 foot, if not 4 foot gap between the Quest that you see there and the Sterret. So you fall off that ladder, you're going down in the ocean in between those two vessels. So, I mean, again, logistically, this was a nightmare. And then we hoisted our supplies down as we needed them, because we had literally no place to put them, because again, the entire ship was a crime scene.
I'm going to add, this is them bringing the sailboat back, Brian and some of the Navy guys on the way. On the top is the MREs. They had to eat on this sailboat as they sailed it over. But we're going to go back to this one. So when it went down, there was 19 pirates on this.
Yeah.
A lot of them were in the forward compartment. The 4 Americans were back on the back end. We'll show where the steering wheel area was. And then probably another 15 SEALs went on board to try to rescue them. So you had upwards of 25, 30 people on this in a shooting match. Of course, one pirate was killed with just a knife. That one was fun to try to package up. And when we processed it out at sea to get the dead bodies off, it was in like 7-foot seas. And as Kate talked about, one of the guys was shot under the chin. So there was brain matter everywhere, which is slippery as anything. And we were sliding in that all over. But then Kate got it when it was nice and cooked later after 5 days at sea. But yeah, so I think Brian helped you with this too. So Brian, the HRT guy, he's a pipe hitter, great guy, and he saw Kate was just having problems, and anyone who gets on the crime scene has to be able to testify in court. So again, you don't want to. Even the admiral wanted a bunch of his people to get on this ship because they weren't sure if it was safe. And I actually made a deal with them. I said, look, I'll let you and one person get on that ship, but I have to log you into the crime scene and log you off. And he's like, oh, you guys take this real seriously. I'm like, yeah, it's people think it's that's the one thing the FBI does. It like does everything by the book, and it takes its time. It has plenty of people and money. But Brian started Tyvexing up, and he put his pipe hitter stuff aside and really started helping Kate out. I think I have a picture.
Well, before you go there, Rob, the one thing I'd also say, that the other thing I try to remind people of, and when I used to train new agents when it worked a crime scene, the other thing that you keep in mind is this is someone's boat. This is where they lived. This is their personal possessions. This is where they died. So there's the element of respect of the victims, respect of where they are, and this is their stuff, right? Because they have families, and these families have suffered a loss. And then when we're done with all the work that we do, we need to figure out what we can salvage for these victims who were brutally murdered, and then get back the stuff that we could get back to them. I mean, that's always a piece of when you're working a crime scene. Unfortunately, it's because, especially if someone's lost their lives or they've lost something, so you're also navigating when you're finding brain matter or clothing of these deceased victims. That's a keepsake to that family, as awkward, as odd as that sounds. So that's something you got to also kind of think about is, we have our rules and we do what we need to do, but it's respect for the dead and respect for the victims, which is ultimately what we're trying to get justice for, right? Is the victims.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that, because we were doing a debrief after one night, and you told me some stuff that was very confidential, and you reminded me, like, hey, this was their house, this is where they lived. We're going to get as much as we can back to the families, because after this they get it. And we'll talk about it later, but at the trial I met the daughters and the kids and the relatives of all the people, and it always went back to me when Kate was telling me about that, because sometimes you get into tasks, what you have to get done and stuff. And I've dealt with a ton of overseas kidnappings, but you still have to remember, we're doing this for the courts and stuff, but also the families of victims and everyone else involved. But that's a good point. So I think this is that you and Brian?
Yeah. So basically, when obviously we knew we had 4 dead Americans killed on the high seas in a foreign territory. So the lawyers from the New York district and the Eastern District of Virginia were very involved. I was on the phone with them, and there's a time difference. I mean, this is like a 24-hour day operation for days, and it's like, all right, guys, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, because that's going to dictate how I prioritize how I'm gathering this evidence. And when they said to me, you need to be able to try to tell us who shot and when, and which is a very tall order based on the SEALs doing the shooting, the pirates doing the shooting, again, the circumstances that Rob and I have already all laid out. So that's when, again, I grabbed Brian, who's a hostage rescue, team member. He was a, great shot. And it's like, all right, we need to recreate the ballistic evidence and categorize every single shot on this boat and try to then differentiate between good guys' bullets and bad guys' bullets and create the trajectory and the ballistic evidence that could eventually, prosecute those who we brought back to the United States for prosecution, which obviously we'll get to later. So that's what Brian and I did. We painfully, every nick every bullet hole we categorized. We took photos of it, multiple photos of each one, and just categorized it. And then every shell casing, hundreds of shell casings that we took off that boat. Again, good guys shell casings and bad guys shell casings. But this was us, trying to start the process.
Were the RPGs still on the boat when you got there?
One was. A few of them that they brought in the bomb techs quickly to make sure, there was more than one. So they took off the ones that were unstable and could have caused problems, obviously, for us as we were, trying to be on the boat we only had, I think, 3 days to process the crime scene, which sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not. So we did have a few of them that were located in two sections of the boat. And then all the weapons, there were, like I said, I think there was 16 all told. And some of the pirates, as Rob knows, like when the SEALs first took off, some of the pirates were throwing the guns overboard that went into the ocean. We never recovered those. And we recovered I believe about 16 of them, which you'll see a couple photos of.
Yeah. So let me go to, the interior ones. So that's the steering wheel. So so that steering wheel, though, when the original shootout happened and we were removing the dead pirates in 6-7 foot seas, sliding all over this place, that steering wheel was off. And when we towed it, it was fine. But when they got on board to have to drive it back, is in the middle of the night, literally like 1 a.m. And that steering wheel was off, and there's only one nut that keeps that thing on. And I remember Brian was talking to me over the radio. He's like, "Hey, we can't find this thing." And then one of the sailors, again, having dealt with so many of these, you get very black humor in order to deal with everything that you see. Unfortunately, you get very dark humor. But the kid, the young Navy guy, looks in, and it was in this like part of a skull, and it was a pirate's, it was pirate's remains. And he just scoops it out, and he goes, "Hey, here it is." And he pours some water over it, and he screws it on, and he screws the steering wheel on. Like that's the crime scene you're dealing with. But so that's how the steering wheel got back on. I don't even know. I'm a Marine. I wasn't a sailor, so I don't know if that's a proper terminology, but it's a steering wheel.
I wish I had known that we could have taken that steering wheel off, because trying to process this scene. So this is what we call them. The plans of the boat, the actual plans of the boat were on the boat, which we actually used to note the room. So this is, like I said, it's a 54-foot sailing vessel called the Quest, and this room was referred to on the plans as the steering gallery. So that's what we called it. And you can't tell from this photo, the perspective is off, but where that steering wheel to the left side of the photograph to the bench seat is about 2.5 inches. So had I had known, and here it is, how many years later, it's the first time I'm hearing about, I could have removed that steering wheel. It would have made processing this area a lot easier.
You probably cussed that steering wheel out how many times?
Yeah. So Rob, I'm not so sure. I'm glad that I know that now, because I would have taken that off. But
I'm going to blame that one on Brian, even though he's a great team member. He screwed you on that one.
Yeah, that thing was a problem. But this is where all 4 Americans were killed, and you can see the void pattern to the left of the photo where one was sitting, and then the other 3 were there, and it's obvious. And again, that's part of the crime scene, right? Determining where people were sitting. We use things like void patterns and things like that because it's obvious. To where they were sitting when they were unfortunately killed. And then you can see the guns that are laying on the bench to the right. Those were just a few of the cache of weapons that the bad guys had. But this was a critical part of the crime scene, because the prosecutors back stateside were like, okay, can you prove via the evidence where the pirate was standing when he killed the Americans? And at first it was like, how the heck are we going to do this? And we actually used, you cannot see in these photographs, but we used the blood spatter patterns at the top, the very top of the steering gallery, which showed the trajectory of the blood. So we knew where the pirate was standing.
So I remember I was I watched this happen, and I was on the Navy ship, and it was me, the SEAL commander, and the Navy captain. We were looking over the edge. They fired an RPG at us. It went over the Navy ship. Then they shot some rounds into the Navy ship, and but we couldn't see into this because of the sun deck above it. But I think you've determined that the ones that shot the Americans, and there was also 2 pirates sitting with them,
Right.
came from below. So forward of the steering wheel, it goes down, and they were down there when they shot, correct?
Yeah, well, there was, that's what we tried to prove, and then there was shots fired from above. But so that's what we were trying to prove of where they were standing, because by the time we got involved, obviously there was, I think, 13 pirates in custody, and they were being interviewed simultaneously of us doing this crime scene. They were aboard another Navy ship being interviewed. So we were also getting some of that information to help us kind of figure out which end was what. And then it was determined that they ended up, a lot of them took deals except for 3. So those 3 pirates we brought up back stateside, and then that became the much bigger part of the conversation of trying to prosecute.
We brought 15 back.
Oh, only 3 went to trial.
Yeah, so 3 that we thought were the shooters went to trial.
Correct.
Because we're going for the death penalty.
Right.
On that one, because what ended up happening, it was the pirate, the way they go out in groups. I always thought they were from one group of pirates, and they're not, because the pirate warlords that fund this, they don't want to, they have to pay for gas, the fuel, the food, and the people to go out. And a lot of these pirates get lost at sea, and then you lose all your money in an investment. So 4 or 5 pirate warlords will put a crew together, and they'll each get to put 3 or 4 of their guys in it. And whoever supplies the most, it's his negotiator, and he gets the bigger percentage. So a lot of the pirates in this group didn't even know each other. They just came together for this one job, so to speak. We were negotiating with them, trying to get them to not go back to Somalia, and the JSOC commander just made it so that the Navy ship I was on would not let them go back, because if they go back, they could last years. And they panicked, and this one group of like 3 or 4 of them decided to kill the Americans. And when Kate talks about it, it's so complex that the pirates that we took, there was actually 15 of them. 2 turned to be underage, so they were released.
Yeah.
But Kevin, the case agent on this, was on the aircraft carrier where all the pirates are being held, doing interviews, and he's relaying back on a radio back and forth to me or to Kate, and trying to find out what happened. And that's when we start piecing together that it was these rogue ones that thought if they killed America, the Navy ships wanted Americans, so if they kill them, we'll go away. Obviously, not great thinking.
Right.
But as soon as they shot them, the rest of the pirates just came out like they weren't part of the murders. It was this one group. So that's the ones they went after the death penalty for. The other ones still got like life in prison. They just just did a plea deal on that. And then the one pirate I chased with Brian and Lance around Africa was the negotiator. That was the main guy trying to get money when he found out this happened. But yeah, it was really complex when Kate flew in, Kevin and another couple case agents flew in, correct?
Yeah, we all flew in together, and we all kind of knew our assignments,
Yeah.
We at that point, the pirates had been taken to the other naval ship, and we kind of divided and conquered, and I went right to the Sterret to go to the scene, and then the case agents went, and again they were relaying information to us, and there's language barriers and things like that. Like it was a very, to use your word, complex situation to try to piece it together. But it was pretty clear once we started getting the statements from the case agents, the 3 main guys who were the ones who kind of made the decision it was literally a snap decision. They were like, they're done. And once he made that motion, I think witnesses said that one pirate made the motion, he did this, and the weapons came up, and they just absolutely gunned down these 4 innocent Americans.
Yeah. And they shot 2 of their own too.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
and we found all the, the Americans had, obviously they're selling around the world. They've got video cameras and we processed all of those. So we found video cameras where they were with these Americans for a few days before they executed them. And so we had pictures of the pirates interacting with the victims, which was blowing. They were putting on the, Americans' clothes, and they were, at one point the victims were smiling, and again, they're sitting there just hoping to God this ends well, and obviously it didn't. But that's again another piece of the case that is not. It's not a common thing to kind of see that level of evidence. The victims actually wrote some notes in the daily sailing log, which we used, which is a huge piece of evidence for us that we used at trial. And they wrote some notes to their loved ones. Again, very sad piece of the case. At that point, I don't know if they knew they were going to die. But all of that we came across and kind of used when we finally got to the trial 2 years later.
Wow, I didn't even know about that. I was at a different part of the trial than you were. And it's odd because we both went on and did stuff after this, and then you come back for the trial. It's odd how much you have to process during this. But at one point, again, the hostage, when you're held hostage like that and you talk to some of them, you try to ingratiate yourself. You try to make yourself human to them is the biggest thing. I've been through the negotiator school. You always want to call the victims by their name. You want to talk to them about humans, make the hostage takers acknowledge that. But the captain of the ship, the ship had problems with its engine, keeping fuel to it. And the captain kept fixing it for him because he kept, if he thought we get to land or we get somewhere, and he wanted to ingratiate himself with the pirates and be the good guy so that they would treat him better. He kept fixing the ship. As we look back on it, the pirates on board they were not allowed to negotiate. That's not their job. They take the boat. They normally take big freighters. They happened to take this one because the Yemeni fishing boat that they'd hijacked to get a big ship was running out of fuel. They woke up, they saw this one with the American flag, and they told them like, "Oh, we saw American flag, and we figured that they pay money, for hostages," which is exact opposite, like some of the other countries will. So they 19 of them got on this sailboat, and they were actually looking for a big freighter to hijack from this sailboat. And then that's when the SOS went out and the Navy got involved, and we came on board or alongside of it. I think though, the pirates, as long as they kept moving, their job was to get the sailboat back to Somalia, and that's all they could do. And they gave us a phone number of the negotiator, and that's in the other story how we found him. And they said, call him. He negotiates. I think if the sailboat went dead in the water, they would have had to change their tactics, because at that point they wouldn't have had that vision. We can get this back to Somalia. Yeah. Not to say that was any, deciding factor, but I think it's a mentality. If you're dead in the water, then I think you have to deal with the Navy ships around you, as opposed to they just kept going. They said, if we're moving, we're going in the straight line back to Somalia. But again, the hostages were, trying to ingratiate themselves, and the pirates, again, when you look at the whole history of piracy in Somalia, it started off as defending their fishing rights. They had a bunch of countries coming over, fishing really close to the Somali waters, and the Somalians were like, well, that's our fish, you're stealing it. And then they started pirating the fishing ships, and then they started getting money for it. And then they kind of looked at these bigger ships and started pirating them. And it was during famine and everything else. So understanding piracy, which we didn't know when we went out there at all. Like, we had no understanding of exactly what we were doing, how these pirate gangs were even made. We learned it later. So, it's one of those things. But let's see. I'm going to go to, here's another picture of the inside. So yeah, I can see the 2.5 inches on the left there.
Yeah. Not a lot of room. It was small. and we found a lot of, and I always caution talking about people's remains because again, it's the family of our 4 dead Americans, but it was a tough scene because at the end of the day, forensically, you're thinking this is the end of someone's life, right? You find certain things, and it's tough. Again, their clothing, their personal effects, but it was a very tight area, and you can kind of see where the steering wheel on the right is actually hitting the bench. That's how little space we had to get around. So it was tight.
I'm trying to find. There was one that showed the lower level with the AK. So when we went to prosecute it down below, there was a pirate. He was a fat pirate. Like it was like I didn't realize. Like I'm like everyone else was skinny, and the one fat guy happened to be on the very very bottom, and his whole body position. He was laying on top of like 4 AKs.
Yeah.
So we had to lift him up because when we're removing him in 6-foot seas, we had to lift him up, and Brian was trying to take a picture to show the guns were under him, and the guy actually weighed a lot, and we're sliding around and everything. But I didn't see that picture so much. So again, it was then you talked about it. You had 3 days because the ship had to get out to sea. That we had it protected. We had it on the outside. We'll go back to this one. So the port we were in wasn't a naval, like it wasn't a naval port. It was a regular, shipping port that the Navy could go in, refuel and get supplies, but they had to put out their own security. It wasn't like it was locked down or anything.
No.
So we put the sailboat on the side outside, so you couldn't see it from the port side. And they were getting a lot of, I guess, grief from the Navy to get back out to sea and, do what they were doing.
Yeah. They were super gracious, obviously, to us, as you mentioned in the beginning. I mean, they knew while we were there, and, we obviously I slept all the way down in the bottom of the Navy ship for 2 hours at a time to get some rest. And I was down in the female berth, and with I guess that's what they call it. I was not in the Navy, but they were young sailors, in their 20s, and they were just like, "Can we come onto the crime scene?" And I was like, "No, unfortunately, couldn't." But they couldn't have been more gracious. But they knew they had to get this boat off the port of Djibouti and back onto whatever their mission was off the coast of Africa. So it was very, very tight timeline. And then at one point they're like, "Yeah, we're leaving," and they left. And we tied the boat to the actual port of Djibouti, which is the day that we got fired upon, because to your point, there was very little security. And we didn't have any sort of force protection. The Coast Guard ended up showing up, which became our friends for a day. But it was, like I said, conditions that you don't want to have to process a crime scene and bring justice. But that's the hand we were dealt. So.
Yeah. So before, so here you're getting, so the Navy boat got shot at, the RPG, and they shot the AK for it. And there's an award, if your ship comes under hostile fire, and they came up to me and said, "Hey, like we're trying to put in for this award. We just want some proof." And next thing we know, we have, we're at the stage. Nope. There you are. So yeah. Kate volunteers to go over the side of the Navy ship to look for was it gun gun residue?
Some sort of ballistic evidence. So I remember the captain said to me, and he was a super nice man, and he said to me, he's like, "Listen, I know you were never in the Navy, but you have to understand something. These ships it's our babies. Like, we keep them clean. We don't like marks. Like," he's like, "This is my ship, my house." And he said, "Can you help us prove that we were shot upon? Because if I bring my ship back to port and it's got all these dings on it." And he goes, "But it was from gunfire." And I said, I agree. So he's like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, I can take a look at it. I've never been on the side of a Navy ship before. And I wasn't Navy. So they rigged up a seat of some sort, and they lowered me down to take swabs off the side of the Navy ship of where the rounds hit it, so they could say that this was not like dereliction of them. It was, they were shot upon. And that was a harrowing experience as well, being hoisted down the side of a Navy ship to take swabs. I could only take supplies that I could fit in my pocket.
Yeah, so I was running back and forth to the military thing as intel came in from a very covert means that the other pirate was still in Somalia, the negotiator. I kept running back and forth, and I came up, and sure enough, let's see if I can get this one picture here.
It's probably not
There
a
you are.
flattering photo.
There's you're like, I'm doing what? Like, and they're like, I knew exactly, having been in the Marines and been on Navy ships, I knew what was happening because I saw guys going over the edge to paint. And I looked at the captain of the ship again. He was a great guy, and he's like, "Yeah, Kate's gonna go over and get some marks for us. We got under fire and everything else." Like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But they were so good to us, and I think at one point they had just be the night before they left, they were allowed to have a party because you can't drink out at sea and stuff.
That picture never showed up, Rob. It's still the steering gallery on the screen.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the last night they were there, they had the party, and it was 20-year-olds. You remember how young you were, and you got to drink a little bit. But they loved us and what we were doing. They loved the fact that they could help. And then we got that everywhere we went. When we told people, everyone from the CIA to the State Department, when we were talking, and like, hey, because it was big in the news, we said, yeah, we're on a mission, for the pirates that killed the 4 Americans. They're like, just tell us what you need. So everything we got. But and someone asked, was it the Somali or the Djiboutian Coast Guard? It was actually it was American Coast Guard. And I remember, though, Brian came back and Lance was there by then, another HRT guy, and they're like, hey, we got to get our kit. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, we're going to talk about him. There was a guy that came into it who was the geographical FBI guy in charge. They called the Legat, from Yemen. And he flew in for this because he was over in Yemen. And he flew in because Djibouti was part of his territory. And I'd just been doing everything with the captain of the ship and the other military guys because I knew them for a long time. But when I was told, when Brian and Lance heard that the Sterret was leaving and the Quest was going to be tied up on the port, and Rod, there's his name, Rod, who is the Legat, he said, "Oh, that'll be fine." Like he like, and Brian and Lance were like, "F that!" Like they went, they got their M4s, they got their all their night vision equipment, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go out and make sure no one screws with the Quest or our people on it." With Kate and them.
Well, that's why I asked Brian. I'm like, I was unarmed at this time, and I said, someone needs to give me a weapon. I'm a sitting duck standing here on the port of Djibouti, and I said, I need a gun. And at one point, I think I had a 9mm in my pocket. I didn't even have a holster, and it was just kind of like, yeah, here you go, because we were.
Yeah, he went into the SEAL command. He's like, "Hey, just give me some guns. We need some guns." And they're like, "Yeah, okay."
Sitting
Yeah,
ducks.
sure. Here you go.
Sitting ducks.
I had to borrow one for when we went into Somalia to arrest Shibin. I had to borrow the SEAL commander's a buddy of mine. He's like, I'm not using it. Here, take mine.
Yeah.
But Brian and Lance went back out, and here's tell me if you can see. Can you see that? Wait. Can you see that one now?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's looking over. That's from the Sterret.
Yeah, so the tall one happens to be the Legat. I put it up because you can't see his face. So this guy comes in, and we're a pretty tight team now. Like, within about 2 hours, Kate and Brian and her team are just tight with us, and everyone's just doing what they do. Like, what do you need? I'll do it. No one's looking at rank or anything like that.
Right.
This guy comes in, and I was called FBI Rob on the Navy ship because Brian was on the Quest, sailing it back, and then Rob from the fly team had flown to the Enterprise, and he was talking to all the detained pirates and stuff. So it was just me on the ship, and I got maybe 2 hours sleep a night, like Kate was talking about. There was just no time because DC was like 8 hours behind us.
Mm-hmm.
So when they woke up, they all had the questions. So you were up all day working, then all night you're answering to DC. I maybe got 2 hours of sleep, and I'm running around the ship. My pants had ripped. I remember remember that they got caught on. So I only had one pair of pants with me, and they ripped literally from like the hip all the way down to my calf, and I didn't have. I couldn't get pants, So I'm running around. They call FBI Rob, and I'm going to the radio room answering stuff. And we just had a great working relationship with them. And this guy shows up, and the Navy, the captain of the ship says, "Hey, the ambassador is going to come over, and wants to meet the team." And I'm like, "Hey, look, the ambassador's a big deal." I'm like, I got a lot of stuff to do. Like, I can't. He goes, "Okay, I got it." He goes, "Oh, wait." And this guy comes in, and he just does the typical, literally from like the movies, I'm the FBI, I'm in charge. And he literally tells everybody he's in charge. And the captain looks at me, he goes, "I thought you were in charge." He goes, I said, "Yeah, I'm kind of still in charge, but just, bear with them, so to speak." So he starts playing the typical FBI guy, of telling everyone what to do. I'm sure he told you what to do, right?
He tried. He tried. And I just basically, at that point, my sense of humor was gone. And they could have put a movie on him. He was the kind of guy that why they said movies, the FBI shows up and takes everybody's crime scenes away. He tried to take the crime scene away from me, but that wasn't happening.
So at one point, we're catching, like, Brian and Kate are out on this thing. I'm running back and forth, and we're eating, like, the Navy's giving us some food, or you're getting a chow plate from somebody. And so when we have to meet this guy, he wants an update because he's got to update headquarters. Meanwhile, I'm doing it through my own means anyhow.
And I was too. We were all updating headquarters.
We were reporting back to the people that we know that need it. And so at one point, he starts complaining about his lodging, I guess. And we like, I didn't even know where exactly. I knew he was at a hotel or something. Didn't know too much about it. I hadn't been outside of the base in Djibouti. I've been to Djibouti a number of times, but not to the world outside the base. So we're listening to him bitch about the hotel and this, that, and other thing. And then at one point, though, this is going to come out now. So he wanted access to, there was the military base, which he could get on, but on the military base was the SEAL command. And it was very, very much locked down. And again, the commanders were all friends of mine. I was a direct LNO. I was in their building most of the time. And that's where I flew out with. So I said, "Hey, I need 4 or 5 badges for Kate and her team and Brian and Lance." And they just give me, badges that can get in and out. And he comes back and he demands a badge. And I'm like, "I'm sorry. You just don't have the right read-ons. You don't have clearance to be in there. So you can sit outside. We'll go in and get stuff." And he had to stand outside the fence.
Yeah.
So, like, that's how we get little digs back. Like, I could have got him a badge within a half a second, and I probably had one in my pocket and just didn't give it to him.
Yeah.
But the other funny thing, though, was we get done with this, and we finally, Kate finishes the job, and we decide to go out. Were you with us when we went to the hotel?
No, because I think I went back to deal with all the evidence because we were trying to get the evidence back. Yeah, I was not.
Yeah. So it ended up flying the C-17 that was flying the SEALs home, because the SEALs flew out. They jumped into the ocean with their boats and did this. And then they got off that and got back to Djibouti very quickly because they had assume alert in case anything else happened. But then they had to fly back to the United States. So
yeah, I flew with the SEAL team back with all the evidence.
So it wasn't an emergency. So they just had to get put on a regular C-17 rotator. And then what ended up happening, Kate had so much evidence, which we didn't really anticipate, that we just went over and I said, hey, can we get Kate and the evidence back on the C-17 with you? And they're like, yeah, we got room. So we coordinated that. And we'll talk about that in a second. Kate flies back. So it's me, Lance, and Brian now. And now we're now looking at the pirate that was back in Somalia. We have a bunch of intel and we're going to start chasing him for 8 weeks, it turns out. But we go out to this hotel and it's called the Kapinski. And it was like this 5-star like hotel. And we're thinking, oh, it's Djibouti. And we go in there and they had like, it was like the seafood buffet. And it was the first time we had eaten like decent food in a long time. This was the nicest hotel. It was like posh, and the seafood buffet was like, you couldn't believe. And it turns out that's where that Legat was staying. And we're like, are you effing kidding me? He was bitching about this, and Kate's eating like chow on a dirty, nasty crime scene.
MREs.
And he's bitching about the seafood buffet at the Kapinski, and that was like the last straw. We're like, all right, he's done.
Well, he kept saying to me, and because obviously, going back to the, the personal effects, he kept saying to me, hey, well, as soon as you're done with the evidence, we're just going to box everything up and we're going to throw it away. And I was like, that's what he said. And I was like, absolutely not. This is personal effects of 4 Americans. You need to arrange some sort of a convex box, whatever the heck it's called, because think about people who lived on this boat for however long. I mean, they had clothing and books and personal, all this stuff. And he fought me tooth and nail, and I got it overridden, and we were able to get a huge percentage of their personal effects back stateside. But man, it was a battle. He just wasn't having it and wasn't understanding. And it was he didn't help our cause that day, that weekend.
No, that whole time. It just, again, I always get reminded, you guys all see the movie Die Hard, probably, like when those 2 FBI guys come in and they like start demanding everything, and then they're in the helicopter that crashes, and the guy goes, we're gonna have to get a couple new FBI guys. I just find it funny because that when I came in the bureau, it was kind of like that. We had people that were still in there, and it's changed a bunch where we understand, like, hey, the state and locals, like, you got to work with them.
One team, one fight. One team.
Yeah, but this guy was so typical. But we got little digs on him back, and if we ever, I'm working with Ann to try to make a movie on this one because it is crazy. And I just said to one writer, I'm like, there has to be something in there where we dig on this guy, because I promised, like, when we were doing this, like, this is not going to go unnoticed, that you're just the typical Jersey douche.
As long as we get like Jennifer Aniston or Jennifer Gardner to play me, I don't, I want to make sure whoever's going to play me is, is worthy.
Well, it's funny because we were joking about it, and I'd look at Brian. I'm like, oh, I know who could play you. He'd be like, who? I'm like, Danny DeVito, and he's like, oh, dude, come on.
Yeah. You just, like I said, Jennifer Gardner, somebody, or Sandra Bullock, she's played FBI agents before. I'd be okay.
She did. So ends up, you finish the crime scene, and then, so we'll go into, you fly back with the SEALs, and when you fly back on a C-17 with those guys, it's not your typical, as soon as you get to altitude, everyone breaks out sleeping bags and like sleeping down there. But when I remember they started taking a liking to you every time. I think we had you in a brief, just, they like curt, direct, like no BS type of thing. And a lot of them had questions about what happened. And I think they're like asking you, and you're trying to explain stuff, because they don't see that a lot of times. They do something and then they're on to the next thing.
They're gone. It was great. I mean, they educated me. I mean, I didn't know much. I wasn't military, and it was, I think, Rob, was this case, and then I ended up working a few more SEAL cases as the FBI evidence person, as you know. And they were great to work with. I mean, they were like, to your point, like, we get in, we do our duty, and then we're gone. So, the SEALs brought me back in and said, can you tell us, what we can do, how we can help safeguard evidence, and how we can, try to get things that can help, again, bring justice at the end of the day. And they were sponges. They wanted to learn as much as I could teach them. And of course I had a million questions for them, but what an amazing group of men that I was so honored to have worked with in this case and a couple other ones that, they're, what they do is amazing. And, they were extremely gracious, and you're right. They took to me, but I also took to them. Stayed in touch with a few of them who unfortunately were killed in later ops, which I found out. But yeah, just a phenomenal group of men. And it was quite the experience flying back on that C-17 with them. You're right. I mean, they were sleeping on top of convict boxes, and there I am, you're feet to feet with, I think it was me and like 37 guys on this C-17. And of course I'm trying to stay with my evidence that, I didn't want to lose chain of custody, and they were great. They were, again, it was, their mentality was the same as mine. One team, one fight. They didn't care that I wasn't a SEAL. And it was such a great experience all around. I ended up getting on a phone call. One of them, it was his mom's birthday, and God knows what time of day it was. And we're on a sat phone so he can call his mom to wish him happy birthday. And there I am yelling, "Happy birthday," to some woman that I'd never met, because he just, he's like, "No, Mom, it's good. Look, I'm with this FBI agent." Like, it was again, real people. Like, you don't think of that, and it was again, quite the experience.
Yeah. So I remember hearing, cause I got back and I went back into the building, cause I was a dedicated liaison to him. And I heard that, like, "Oh man, Kate's awesome," type of thing. Like, so and that's tough, cause they're hard on people. If you're not, if you're not genuine, if you're not, like, if you don't add to the fight, if you're not value added, they have no time for you. So I heard a bunch about it, and we'll kind of touch on it right now, but, that squadron, that troop, within the squadron, it was Gold Squadron, and it was, Jonas's troop. And, about 6 months later, this happened in April 2011.
February.
What's that?
This was February.
We end up catching. That's right. We end up catching Shibin in April. So this was February, but August, their squadron deployed to Afghanistan on a regular rotation, and this troop went down as a quick reaction force for another SEAL unit that was getting hit pretty hard. And that helicopter, the call sign, the helicopter Extortion 17, was hit by an RPG, and everyone, 38 people aboard, died, including a combat dog. And it was this entire troop except one. I did find out one of the guys that was on this one actually got hurt and didn't deploy on that deployment, and lived. But the entire troop that did this, that you flew home with, died 6 months later, to a man. And it was one of those things when I actually testified, at Shibin's trial, not the other pirates trial that you were at, but I testified at Shibin's trial. The families hadn't heard the story of us chasing him around Africa for 8 weeks. Again, that other podcast, it was just the craziest, chase I've been on. And they hadn't heard that story. And after, the one daughter came up to me, and she was just like, "Oh my God, like, I didn't know." I'm like, "Well, yeah, she wanted to thank me." And I get embarrassed when people thank me, because this is what I signed up for. This is, I mean, serving others in this capacity. There's no feeling like it in the world. But she goes, "Oh, I wish I could tell the SEALs thank you, because I didn't understand, what they did to try to rescue my parents and my mom and everything else." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry that that can't happen." And she goes, "I know they're all secret and stuff." And I said, "No, that's not the reason."
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, they all, to a man, unbeknownst to me, one didn't die, but they all died 6 months later. And she just lost it. She just could not believe that. And that's just one of those things. And I don't even know, like, I've talked to a couple of the, families and stuff, but again, the horror of all those SEALs dying at one time was kind of overwhelming. But the families probably didn't even know that much about them trying to rescue these, because these guys do stuff all the time.
Right.
And it's just one of those things. They go back and, they can't really talk about a lot of the stuff they did. And it just kind of like, was just another thing that they did that, unfortunately didn't save them, but they all tried. But
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. That was the thing. I mean, I worked a couple of these cases over in Africa, and a lot of them, they're still classified to these days, and to this day. I mean, this one was different because we had an American prosecution after the fact, which is
yeah.
not common. I mean, it's just not common that you bring back, subjects from a Somali pirate, group, to then prosecute him in the United States for the death of these four Americans. This was such a different situation. And to your point, you know, some of the other deployments I went on, which again, you can't really discuss them. There was no prosecution, nothing ever hit the
Yeah.
news. But to your point, this is what these guys do. It's a Monday for them, right? It's what they do day in and day out. And this one was different because they got to see, there was a full circle of justice. The most unfortunate thing is they weren't able to save these Americans, but it also wasn't a common thing that pirates would kill Americans as brutally as they did either. That was also another thing that I don't think anybody thought that quote execution order would have been given by that one guy that we brought back stateside to prosecute, because that just wasn't their MO. That they weren't that brutal. And we saw that, and we're watching the videos when they're sitting with the four Americans, which I talked about in the beginning of the show. Like, to your point, they were very, they didn't harm them, they didn't beat them, they didn't assault, they didn't do anything to them. They kind of lived amongst them, which is a strange thing, but they weren't violent. To your point, once the SEALs kind of hit, they all put their hands up like, whoa, we don't kill people.
Yeah.
Except for those three. Like, this was a little bit of an enigma. And how brutal this crime was, because it just wasn't. Usually Somali pirates, they care about money and drugs.
Yeah.
It's not an execution squad.
Yeah.
So that's why this was different.
Yeah. And, you talk about, again, you mentioned how you're trying to stay with your evidence on the airplane. So when we arrested Shibin after chasing him, to Somalia, back down to Zambia, back up to Djibouti, back over to Somalia after 8 weeks. He had luggage that we went and got because we were looking for his phone because it had a lot of evidence in it. And
Yeah.
but we ended up, he had left his luggage at a cousin's house, and we went out literally in the morning in Somalia and found this cousin's house, got this luggage, had him sign all the consent forms for us to search it. He signed the consent forms to talk to us, waived his right to counsel and stuff, because he still has rights. That's what people don't understand. Just because you're not a U.S. citizen, you still have the same rights in a U.S. court.
Yeah.
So when we ended up arresting him, and we flew him out of Somalia in a blacked out jet, so to speak, and then we landed in Djibouti. We could only stay there like an hour. So the FBI's G5 was coming in, and we had to bring Shibin out to Navy ship overnight and then fly back in the morning to get on the FBI G5. So I got this Samsonite, and they fly a helicopter or Osprey in with a platoon full of Marines. And it was a Marine unit I had trained, because my other job in the Bureau is helping the Marines train in realistic urban environments. And I just trained this unit about 6 months prior. And here I come on, I got the beard now though, and I'm dragging a pirate and a Samsonite suitcase, and Brian's there with me. And they're kind of like looking at me like, wait, don't we know him? But I'm dragging this Samsonite around the Navy ship that we're on. And the master at arms says, oh, you can lock it in my stateroom. No one else has the combo. And I'm thinking about it. And then I see like 4 people do the combo to his room and go in it. And I'm like, all right, I can't leave it in there. So I'm literally, and Navy ships, like the stairwells are really small, and I'm dragging the Samsonite around. So finally I get up to the wardroom to eat, and the ship's captain's kind of like, he's looking at the luggage, and I'm like, hey, I need a room to sleep in. I gotta lock this with me. And he says, you guys like take this seriously, don't you? I'm like, yeah, it's evidence. If I have to testify everywhere that's been from when I got it until it shows up in that courtroom, And if I leave it in a room, that I can't do that. You know, technically someone could come in and put something in it. And he's like, well, like the court, I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. The defense attorney can ask, did you have possession of that? And if you didn't and have it the whole time, he said, well, that's where that evidence that, you're saying my client's guilty was put in, and you can't deny it. So
Yeah.
people don't get.
Well, to that point, we, as you can imagine, we had, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of pieces of evidence when you talk about like the photographs, the ballistics, the spent shell casings, and then the blood evidence and all that. I remember when we finally got back, and then this whole time we're on this boat, we already described it's moving, 100-degree weather, awful. We were trying to maintain all of our documentation, and I used to get made fun of. I tend to be a little bit of a stickler for documentation. Well, sure enough, we get back stateside, and I had misnumbered one section of, I had broken it up, this evidence came from the steering gallery. This evidence came from the master bedroom downstairs, or, whatever. And we had everything labeled, and I'd misnumbered. And the prosecutor and I realized it when we were prepping for trial. And he said, man, this is a death penalty trial, right? These people are on trial. Yeah. These pirates are on trial for their lives. And he said, we got to own this mistake of yours, because the defense attorney is going to come after you and be like, well, you made this mistake. Who's to say, where all this other stuff is not a mistake of yours? And I'm thinking to myself, you've got to be kidding me. I have to get on stand and basically say, yes, I misnumbered this piece of evidence. And the prosecutor said, why? And of course, your excuse is conditions, fatigue, all these other things. And sure enough, the first thing the defense attorney says to me, he said, well, Agent Kelley, you made this mistake. Who's to say all this other stuff that you did for 3 days wasn't a mistake? And that's why, we train agents, we train crime scene people, like every single detail matters, because it's what proves the innocence or guilt of the people you're putting on trial. But yeah, we had to own the mistake in trial.
Yeah. And then, it's funny because when you started talking about that, that's the one thing I saw in the Karen Reed case, that you have to own it. Like think mistakes do happen. So one time I was out with the SEALs when they rescued Jessica Buchanan, who was kidnapped by pirates a short time. I think it was after this. I get them all mixed up, but I flew out there with them. I helped find her in the desert in Somalia. And then they flew in and they jumped out of a plane at 25,000 feet, snuck up for, in like 2 miles, and ended up killing all 9 of the pirates and rescued her and her colleague. And we didn't have any HRT guys go on that op. It was the timeline didn't work out right. So I told the guys when they were coming back, I said, look, you guys are going to take pictures. I need to get those, compact flash cards. I said, we can give your command copies of everything so that you can use them in your storybooks and stuff for, how the op went. I said, but I need those pictures. And I gave him a quick, lesson, because I used to do this all the time in Iraq and Afghanistan, doing sensitive site surveys on how to number rooms quickly in combat and take pictures. So the SEAL comes back and he's like, he's the camera guy. And he goes, here's, and I'm looking through it, and I'm looking at the number of the pictures, and sure enough, one's deleted. And I said, dude, no deleting. What'd you do? And he goes, I accidentally took a picture of my shoe, so I deleted it. I'm like, oh. I said, dude, look, I don't care. You take a picture of your junk. I can explain a picture of your junk to the jury. I can explain that. I can't explain the deleted picture, because the defense attorney is going to write in how that picture that was deleted is what, is totally exculpatory to his client. Yeah. It's like, I'm like, leave it in. I don't care what, but again, people just don't understand until you've been to trial. And that's the other thing, like I talk about a couple of times is like, trial is like, it's like a play. Like the whole thing is you do the prep and stuff, but I always made it, when I was telling a story, I would just talk to the jury. I'd look at them, I'd talk, because I want them to see me as I'm telling it. But anytime I was saying something that was accusatory of the subject, I would make sure the jury saw that. I would look at the subject and I would say what he said or what he did, looking straight at him, because I thought it was important that the jury saw me look at him and say it to his face.
Yeah.
because again, the whole thing, when again you look at a lot of people on this, this podcast with the Karen Reed thing, like when you're talking to them, like you can be human, and you talk to them, and you can make mistakes, and you can do things and explain them, but you still have to be credible. You have to talk to them and look at them. And a lot of that is they get from nonverbal cues and how you do it. But I always wanted them to see that I was willing enough to look at a subject and accuse him of something or say that he said something, because I thought that was always important. What are your thoughts on that? Because you've
No,
testified in a lot more trials than me.
yeah, I mean, I've testified. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've testified, and I think that's exactly true. Like, you just be real, and it's a conversation, and you stand by your statements, and again, when the defense attorney comes after me saying, well, Agent Kelly, how can I, you made this mistake, or you did this, it's like, yep, you're correct, yep, and again, you own it. Obviously it should go without saying that you don't ever lie on the stand. Obviously there's no such thing, but you're right about the deleting. You tell the story. You speak right directly to the subject. To your point, I've done that. I've worked a lot of crimes against children cases in my life where the evidence is the photos and the testimony of the children, and God forbid, we have to get a child on stand. You look right in the eyes of these people that have horribly hurt a child, and you say it bluntly, because it's the fact, right? We're testifying to the facts as we know them. It's not my opinion. It's not Kate Kelley's opinion. It's not Rob D'Amico's opinion. It's the facts, right? Because that's really that matters. My opinion doesn't matter. The facts of what I was able to gather is what matters, whether it's their own words in a confession or evidence that I've collected. That's it. And then it's up to the jury to make the decision at that point.
Yeah, it's always funny. Like I always say, like the lawyers can talk about things, but proving something is totally different. You can, like the opening statement, you can say, but you have to actually prove it in court. And that's a huge uphill battle that people don't really understand, like type of thing. And that's where some of the computer stuff gets dicey, like, on the Karen Reed thing, like the Google searches, and you can always bring sometimes subject matter experts in that one says this thing and one says this one. And then, it's an opinion, and it goes down to who the jury believes when it's two opinions that don't matter. But did you notice a difference after the show CSI came out, that they expected so much more?
Well, it's funny you say that. We used to deal with the CSI effect all the time. And in fact, it worked to my benefit. At one point, I was working a drug case. I wasn't working the drug case. I got asked by the drug squad. They wanted DNA of this guy that shot and killed a store clerk down in, I can't even think of what state it was. And he had traveled up to the New York area and then shot someone else, hence why it was a federal case. And they found him, and the squad said, hey, can you come out with us? Because we're going to hit this apartment, and we want you to help us get his DNA, take a buccal swab and get his DNA. And this was after CSI had come into the effect. And we get to the apartment, and we obviously have a warrant. And basically, I'm talking to the guy, and I said, okay, I'm open your mouth. I'm going to take a swab of your DNA. And they're trying to get it, they're trying to talk to him. He did not ask for a lawyer, and I'll never forget it. And I literally swabbed his cheek, and I said, now I'm going to go downstairs in the truck and run this. Is it going to match the hat we found at the scene? And he was like, little did he know that there was no truck downstairs. There was no lab downstairs. That would have been a 3-4 week, 6-month process. But thanks to CSI, this subject believed that I could go down to the truck and run a quick DNA. And I remember the supervisor looked at me like, you just got a confession because you made the subject believe that I could run DNA in my truck downstairs.
I learned that like the first week in Miami. I'm working fugitives, and we pick up this guy who's friends with the guy we're looking for. He had a warrant on him. So like, it's like literally like my first or second arrest, and he's a Miami-Dade cop. So I'm driving, and he's in the passenger seat, and he looks back. He goes, hey, look, we're so-and-so. He goes, I don't know, man. He goes, look, I got a lie detector, and it's going to tell me if you're lying. And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? So he takes his Motorola radio, and there's a side tone button that you can hit. This just makes a tone, right? So he asks him, what's your name? And the kid says his name, and he just tones it really slow. And he goes, where's so-and-so? And he goes, I don't know. And he just starts hitting the button really fast. He goes, it's lying. And the guy looks at me and goes, damn, that thing's good. And he tells us where he's at. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
but I learned real quick that people, this is kind of before CSI, but it was like one of those, I used a pulse ox in Afghanistan, told them it was a lie detector. I could see their heart rate and their, their blood saturation. But
But see, the CSI effect, I think, is helpful in those situations that we've described. But going back to the trial thing, it hurt us a little bit, right? Because they didn't understand that, again, what you don't see when you watch CSI, they solved the crime in 37 minutes minus the commercial, and it's like what they don't see is just the unbelievable amount of documentation and checking and rechecking and the packaging and the chain of custody and the jury wants you to say what they see on CSI. Well, the CSI team went in and took care of it in 10 minutes. Why did it take you 3 days? Those are the questions I would get. It's like, because here are the steps that I need to take, and I used to joke and I love CSI. I mean, that's, it's great. But I used to joke that every time you watch CSI, every time they walk into the room, did you ever notice no one ever turns on a light? They always use their flashlights. And I'd say to myself, turn the light on, because it's a lot easier to see the evidence if you just turn the lights on. But it's not as sexy when you see what we do in a crime scene versus what they do on CSI. But the CSI effect is definitely real when it comes to juries. And it was definitely real when it comes to subjects, but I've seen it work to my benefit.
All right. So I think we can start wrapping this up. It's been an hour and 15. So I told you it would go quick. You're like, it's gonna be a half hour. I'm like, no. But I just knew, like, from the subject and everything that we dealt with, and we didn't even get into some of the things that we could have. But again, this was an unbelievable team. I was very proud of everything and everyone that participated in it was just incredible. Like I said, pitching in, doing everything. And it was one of those ones that obviously I'll never forget. But it also talks to what the U.S. will do to prosecute people that hurt and kill Americans, because we at one point when I actually grabbed Shibin, he thought I was going to when I was about to put him on that blacked out jet, it was a dirt runway in Somalia, and he thought I was just going to shoot him in the head and get on the plane myself. And I'm like, no, like, you're the safest person in the planet. Like, you're going back to trial. And he really didn't comprehend that. But that's what we do. We don't shoot people. We bring them back. And now, of course, some of the terrorists, my buddies, did exactly that. And, and that, when it comes down to it, but with this one, when it's a crime like this, it makes this difference, I think.
Yeah, no, and I spoke to the family at the trial. I mean, obviously, we didn't really touch on that, but the 3 pirates, it was a death penalty trial down the Eastern District of Virginia, and it lasted several weeks. And I testified for a couple of days, and the prosecution team did an excellent job. The families were there. It was 2 couples that were killed, and they had families, and I met the family, like you said, and extremely gracious and thankful for what we did. And again, I remember getting the evidence back. We had it sanitized because obviously we already described the kind of scene it was in, and they were extremely thankful for, getting back the personal effects, the photos. I mean, there was one picture, you didn't show it, where, where they slept. They had, pictures on the wall of their family, several different pictures. We got all that stuff back to them. Yeah. And they were, thankful that justice was served. The pirates were ultimately not sentenced to the death penalty.
It was one juror that
didn't. It's funny.
They got life, but not death.
All three got life, and none of them got the death penalty. And people said to me afterward, like, "Are you disappointed?" And I said, "Well, I think it was a tall order because of the circumstances of processing this crime scene, which we've already described, to prove it at that level where we were going to take someone's life, i.e. the pirate's life. It was a tall order. I appreciated the gumption of the prosecution team to even go for the death penalty because it was such a horrific crime. But obviously life in prison without the possibility of parole, I was fine with, and still felt like there was justice, that these guys weren't going to go out and do it to anybody else. Because again, the way in which they made such a snap decision to just absolutely gun down these very, innocent Americans, just cold blood, like just
Yeah.
absolutely cold-blooded murder. I've never seen anything like it, especially after the days they spent with them. So at the end of the day, you know, the trial, the evidence, the stories, the relationships, it was certainly one of the biggest cases I've worked start to finish. You know, the connection with the SEAL team, which I was so incredibly fortunate to work several other missions with the SEAL team, which I think, Rob, you were a part of, getting me involved with those guys down there. And, you know, definitely a lifetime honor to do that.
Well, thank you for being here. My
Thank
first
you.
show. I also want to thank, I got to like plug this one, Go Pills. My buddies run this company. It's Nootropics. So it's for brain function and brain recovery. And they're Aleko and Christian, great guys to get back to police and the military. And they design these, that and Soldier Fuel is their energy drink that they're helping me out with this podcast. So I want to thank them. If you go to gopills.com, you put in Rob for the code, you get a discount, but I use it all the time when I'm on the news and stuff like this, just to help me think clearer. So
Nice.
thank you, everyone. I appreciate you guys being here for my first one. And thank you, Kate. Kate, hang on a second. I'm going to end the show, but you'll still be online.
Thanks, Rob.